September 1st, 1943, Rabaul Airfield, New Britain. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai's hand paused over the intelligence brief, his sole functional eye, the other lost to American ordnance a year prior, devouring words that ignited a loud, unexpected burst of laughter within the sweltering operations tent. The Americans, it seemed, had engineered a new aerial predator, as ponderous as a bomber and as expansive as a transport. They'd christened it the Hellcat. Our intelligence indicated it possessed double the mass of our Zero, another testament to American design ineptitude. Peering through the tent's canvas flaps, he could observe his A6M0 squadrons arrayed on the pierced steel planking, lithe, agile, lethal. For 2 full years, these machines had lorded over the Pacific firmament, British Hurricanes, American P-40s, Dutch Brewster Buffaloes, all had capitulated to the Zero's cannons. This latest American endeavor, this corpulent Hellcat, would prove no different. What Sakai failed to grasp, what none of the Japanese naval aviators assembling for their morning briefing comprehended, was that in precisely 30 days, this purported failure would initiate the systematic disintegration of Japanese naval aviation. The F6F Hellcat would achieve a devastating kill ratio of 19-1, eradicating 5,223 enemy aircraft, while surrendering a mere 270 in aerial engagements. It would fundamentally alter carrier warfare, shatter the backbone of Japanese air power, and demonstrate that the Zero's reign of dominance had been predicated on a bedrock of critical miscalculations. The calculus of aerial supremacy was poised to be fundamentally redefined by an aircraft that appeared ungainly, flew heavily, and seemingly defied every principle the Japanese had painstakingly refined. Yet, within 6 months, the very pilots now scoffing at intelligence reports would be penning final missives home, fully aware that an encounter with a Hellcat signified the statistical certainty of their demise, the zenith of the rising sun. The Japanese Navy's assurance in September 1943 was not born of hubris. It was rooted in mathematics. Since December 7, 1941, the Imperial Japanese Naval Air Service had recorded victory metrics that defied credulity. At Pearl Harbor, they sustained 29 aircraft losses against the destruction of 347. In the Philippines, 7 losses compared to 103 vanquished. Over Darwin, 2 losses versus 30. The British Far East Fleet's aerial contingent was annihilated. The Dutch East Indies Air Force was erased in mere days. At the heart of this ascendancy soared the Mitsubishi A6M0, an aircraft that had redefined the very tenets of fighter design. When captured specimens were subjected to rigorous testing by American engineers in 1942, they initially recoiled from the reported performance figures. A fighter boasting the operational radius of a bomber, the agility of a biplane, and the firepower to obliterate any adversary it pursued, it seemed beyond the realm of possibility. Warrant Officer Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, who would ascend to become Japan's preeminent ace with 87 confirmed kills, eloquently captured the essence of the Zero in his recovered diary. "To pilot the Zero is akin to being granted wings," he wrote. "The aircraft anticipates intent, not merely responds to control inputs. American aircraft lumber like trucks, potent yet unwieldy. They construct fighters in the manner of automobiles, weighty, excessively engineered, and inefficient. The Zero's remarkable performance was the product of a revolutionary design ethos. The use of extra superduralumin, a classified aluminum alloy, yielded a structure 30% lighter than comparable American designs. The pilot was afforded no protective armor plating. No self-sealing fuel tanks added extraneous weight. Even the radio was frequently omitted to conserve precious mass. Every ounce was sacrificed in the pursuit of uncompromised performance. The dismissal of intelligence. The initial dispatches concerning the F6F Hellcat reached Japanese intelligence conduits through neutral Swedish channels in early 1943. The accompanying specifications were met with profound skepticism, perceived as either outright propaganda or deliberate deception. The aircraft, when fully loaded, tipped the scales at 12,186 pounds, a stark contrast to the Zero's 5,800 pounds. Its wingspan stretched 33 feet, 4 inches. its draggy radial engine contributing to its considerable bulk. It carried 2,400 rounds of ammunition, pervasive armor plating, bulletproof glass, and self-sealing tanks capable of holding 150 gallons of fuel. Captain Minoru Genda, the tactical mastermind behind the Pearl Harbor assault, meticulously reviewed these specifications at Combined Fleet Headquarters. His analysis, preserved within the Japanese Defense Archives, was one of unequivocal dismissal. "The Americans have learned nothing," he declared. "This Hellcat embodies the perpetuation of their flawed doctrine, seeking to surmount pilot skill with sheer mechanical might. A Zero will effortlessly outmaneuver it." The mathematics of the situation appeared to corroborate his assessment. The Zero's wing loading of 22 pounds per square foot afforded it a turning radius of 612 feet. The Hellcat's wing loading, a significantly higher 36.5 pounds per square foot, suggested a turning radius exceeding 900 feet. In a turning engagement, the cornerstone of all Japanese fighter tactics, the Hellcat would be rendered utterly impotent. The initial sighting, September 30th, 1943, Marcus Island. Petty Officer First Class Yoshio Fukui was engaged in an escort mission for a reconnaissance flight when he detected them. 6 dark blue shapes ascending from the southeast. His immediate thought, as documented in his after-action report, B-25 bombers on an unorthodox trajectory. Then they pivoted, revealing their distinctive silhouette: a single engine, a colossal fuselage, and wings that seemed disproportionately diminutive for its frame. "First encounter with F6F type fighter," he would later write. "Initial impression: the Americans have affixed fighter armament to a torpedo bomber." Engaged with standard tactics. Standard tactics entailed exploiting the Zero's superior turn rate to gain a positional advantage on the enemy's tail. Fukui initiated a diving turn, anticipating that the cumbersome American fighter would continue on a straight path, allowing him to seamlessly curve onto its 6 o'clock position. Instead, something entirely unprecedented occurred. The Hellcat did not evade. It made no attempt to match his turn. It ascended vertically. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine, generating 2,000 horsepower, a full 700 more than the Zero's Nakajima, Sakai's 1,130 horsepower, propelled the Hellcat skyward at an astonishing 3,500 feet per minute. Fukui, desperately attempting to maintain pursuit, watched his airspeed plummet as the Zero struggled against the relentless pull of gravity. At 15,000 feet, the Hellcat executed a maneuver that defied its perceived limitations, a hammerhead turn that positioned it directly on Fukui's tail. "The American opened fire at 400 meters, Fukui reported. 6 machine guns, not the 4 we anticipated. The sheer volume of fire was unparalleled. My aircraft sustained 17 hits in 3 seconds. Only by plummeting into a spin did I manage to escape." Fukui survived, barely limping back to Marcus Island, with his Zero riddled with holes. His wingman, Petty Officer Second Class Masao, did not return. Neither did the reconnaissance aircraft they were tasked with protecting. Then first blood to the Hellcat. The paradox of weight. October 5th, 1943. Task Force 14 struck Wake Island. Lieutenant Yoshio Shiga led 12 Zeros from the 252nd Air Group to intercept what appeared to be another routine raid. American carriers had been conducting these hit-and-run strikes for months, typically withdrawing before Japanese fighters could mount a concerted engagement. This instance, however, would prove profoundly different. "We climbed to 20,000 feet, Shiga recorded in his diary. "Below us, 12 F6F fighters in 3 formations. We held every conceivable advantage: altitude, position, surprise. Victory was assured." The ensuing engagement irrevocably shattered Japanese tactical doctrine. As the Zeros commenced their dive upon the Hellcats, the American fighters did not disperse or attempt to outturn them. They maintained their formation, accelerating in a gentle descent that preserved their energetic momentum. When the Zeros unleashed their fire at maximum range, hoping for fortunate strikes, the Hellcats simply absorbed the punishment. The Hellcat's defensive suite included 212 pounds of armor, safeguarding the pilot, 110 pounds protecting the oil system, and self-sealing tanks capable of withstanding dozens of impacts. As the Zeros expended their ammunition in successive diving passes, the Hellcats initiated their counteroffensive. Rather than engaging in close-quarters dogfighting, they weaponized their considerable mass. Ascending at full throttle, they attained altitudes where the Zero's engines struggled to breathe in the rarefied air. At 25,000 feet, the Hellcat still produced 1,650 horsepower, while the Zero was reduced to a mere 900. They descended upon us like hawks upon sparrows, Shiga wrote. Their weight bestowed upon them a velocity we could not match. They would dive, unleash those 6 formidable guns, then ascend beyond our reach before we could react. 8 Zeros were downed. Not a single Hellcat was lost. The Mariana Islands Turkey Shoot Prophecy. November 11th, 1943. Rabaul. The assembled pilots of the 204th Air Group listened intently as Lieutenant Commander Tao Tanemizu briefed them on emergent American aerial tactics. Tanemizu, with 32 aerial victories to his credit, was among the few pilots who had survived multiple engagements with Hellcats. Discard everything you believe you understand about aerial combat, he admonished them. The Americans have fundamentally altered the rules. They no longer engage on our terms. They fight like executioners, not warriors. Tanemizu elucidated the grim reality that Japanese pilots were slowly and fatally beginning to comprehend. The Hellcat was not engineered to outmaneuver the Zero. It was designed to negate the necessity of such a maneuver. Embodying a combat doctrine known as energy fighting, Hellcat pilots meticulously preserved airspeed and altitude, adeptly converting potential energy into kinetic energy through slashing attacks that offered Zero pilots no opportunity to leverage their superior maneuverability. They operate in pairs, Tanemizu continued, one positioned high, the other low. While you are engaged with one, the other is already commencing its dive upon you. Their radios, which we derided for adding weight, enable them to coordinate with chilling precision. We fly as individual samurai. They fight as a unified machine. The Technological Chasm, December 1943, Truk Atoll. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, who had spearheaded the audacious attack on Pearl Harbor, now served as the air operations officer for the combined fleet. His assessment of damaged Zeros returning from encounters with Hellcats starkly revealed the escalating technological disparity. The difference in firepower was starkly mathematical. The Hellcat's 6 Browning M, 2 machine guns, discharged 750 rounds per minute each, a collective 4,500 rounds per minute. Each .50 caliber projectile weighed 46 grams and traveled at 2,900 feet per second, delivering 3,500 foot-pounds of energy. More disquieting were the reports of American radar-guided fighter direction. While Japanese pilots continued to rely on visual acquisition to detect adversaries, Hellcat pilots were guided to their targets by shipboard radar controllers who possessed the capability to track Japanese aircraft from 50 miles distant. Lieutenant Sadamu Kumachi recounted his first radar-directed interception. We were ascending through cloud cover when they struck us. No warning, no visual contact. Hellcats diving from above, precisely on our heading, perfectly positioned. They knew our location, our altitude, our course. We were blind men battling those who could perceive in absolute darkness. The pilot equation. January 1944. The crisis of Japanese pilot attrition had reached catastrophic proportions. The pre-war Imperial Navy pilot training regimen had been the world's most rigorous. Training spanned 3 years, with pilots entering combat engagements possessing 700 flight hours. Army pilots received a minimum of 500 hours. They were veritable artists of aerial combat, meticulously trained in aerobatics, marksmanship, and the philosophical tenets of aerial warfare. By early 1944, Japanese naval pilots were entering combat with a mere 300 flight hours, and Army pilots with a paltry 200. Pervasive fuel shortages necessitated that the majority of training be conducted in gliders. Gunnery practice was restricted to a meager 50 rounds per pilot. Formation flying, instrument flight, and radio procedures were all systematically curtailed to expedite pilots' deployment to the front lines. Concurrently, American pilots were arriving with a minimum of 300 hours, including 50 hours specifically in their assigned aircraft type. They had discharged thousands of practice rounds, mastered carrier landings through relentless repetition, and honed their energy tactics in the controlled safety of Texas airfields. Lieutenant Commander Yoshihiro Hashimoto, training officer at Kasumigara Naval Air Station, articulated the grim reality in his final report. "We are dispatching children to confront seasoned professionals." He elaborated, "Yesterday, Ensign Yamamoto arrived at the front. He had never discharged his weapons in flight. We possess no ammunition for practice. He had never flown at night. We have no fuel for such endeavors. He lasted 7 minutes in his inaugural combat sortie. The Formosa Revelation, October 12th to 16th, 1944. The Battle of Formosa. Vice Admiral Shigeru Fukudome, commander of the 2nd Air Fleet, committed every available resource in a desperate bid to thwart the American carrier incursions upon Formosa. Over 700 aircraft, including the last rigorously trained pilots from the Homeland Training Squadrons, were deployed. The Japanese issued claims of a spectacular victory, asserting the destruction of 26 carriers and battleships and the elimination of 300 aircraft. The grim reality, however, only emerged after the pilots returned, and the gun camera footage was meticulously developed, a catastrophic outcome. Actual American losses amounted to 89 aircraft. Japanese losses soared to 329 aircraft, accompanied by the decimation of nearly every experienced pilot. Lieutenant Sadaki Akamatsu, one of the few surviving veterans, poignantly described the carnage in his memoirs. "The Hellcats lay in wait at every altitude," he recounted. "As we ascended, they were positioned above us. As we dove, they were positioned below. They had meticulously divided the sky into sectors, each segment meticulously covered by a dedicated division. It was not combat, it was systematic extermination. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, June 19th, 1944. The Philippine Sea." The Japanese Navy committed its reconstituted carrier force to Operation A-Go, a decisive engagement intended to shatter American carrier dominance in the Pacific. 9 carriers, 450 aircraft, their most capable remaining pilots, all were deployed. Arrayed against them was Task Force 58, comprising 15 carriers and 956 aircraft, 450 of which were F6F Hellcats. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa launched his strikes in 4 distinct waves, confident that Japanese pilot proficiency and the Zero's superior range would ensure their triumph. The inaugural wave of 69 aircraft departed at 8:30. American radar detected them at a distance of 150 miles. Hellcats were vectored for interception with impeccable positioning. They held the altitude advantage, the sun at their backs, and approached from the Japanese forces' blind spots. Lieutenant Zenji Abe, leading the fighter escort, sighted the Hellcats mere minutes before the engagement commenced. They were stacked from 20,000 to 30,000 feet, at least 60 of them, waiting like a steel curtain, he reported. "We were at 18,000 feet. Every advantage was theirs. The engagement lasted a mere 12 minutes. Of the 69 Japanese aircraft launched, 42 were shot down. Commander David McCampbell, Carrier Air Group 15's Air Group Commander, personally downed 7 aircraft on that single day. His wingman, Lieutenant Roy Rushing, accounted for 6 more. The Zeros attempted to engage us in a turning fight," McCampbell stated. "We simply refused to participate. We executed high-side passes, destroyed an aircraft, then executed a zoom climb back to altitude. They would attempt to follow, losing airspeed, and another Hellcat would pick them off. By day's end, the Japanese had suffered losses totaling 346 carrier aircraft, in addition to 50 land-based aircraft. American losses amounted to 30 aircraft from all causes. American pilots in their ready rooms that evening coined the term Turkey Shoot. The enemy aircraft had been as defenseless as game birds. The Leyte Gulf Record, October 24th, 1944. The Battle of Leyte Gulf. Commander David McCampbell would establish his personal single-mission record during this pivotal battle. Leading a formation of 7 Hellcats from the USS Essex, he intercepted a contingent of 60 Japanese aircraft en route to the American fleet. In the ensuing 90-minute engagement, McCampbell personally downed 9 aircraft, comprising 5 Zeros and 4 bombers, while his wingman, Roy Rushing, destroyed an additional 6. "I ran out of ammunition after my 9th kill," McCampbell recorded. "The Hellcat performed flawlessly throughout. Not a single hit was sustained by my aircraft, despite being outnumbered 8-1. This engagement unequivocally demonstrated the complete reversal of air superiority. 7 Hellcats had routed 60 Japanese aircraft, destroying 15 without incurring any losses." McCampbell's 2 ace-in-a-day performances, 7 kills on June 19th and 9 on October 24th, earned him the prestigious Medal of Honor and Navy Cross. The psychological collapse. The aftermath of the Philippine Sea and Leyte Gulf battles engendered what Japanese military psychologists would later term Hellcat psychosis among surviving pilots. Admiral Ozawa, in his after-action report, lamented, "The enemy's radar-guided fighter direction achieved something we deemed impossible, the industrialization of air combat. Each Hellcat was not an independent fighter, but an integrated component within a vast interconnected system. Our pilots, irrespective of their skill level, found themselves engaging not individual aircraft, but an entire operational framework. The pilot shortage became so dire that by early 1945, training was drastically reduced to 40 to 50 hours for Navy pilots and 60 to 70 hours for Army pilots. Kamikaze pilots received a mere 40 to 50 hours of total flight time, approximating 7 days of instruction. The Okinawa Apocalypse, April to June, 1945. Operation Iceberg. The Japanese launched 1,900 kamikaze sorties against the American fleet off the coast of Okinawa. The Hellcat evolved from a mere fighter into a crucial defender against the desperation of these suicide attacks. Lieutenant Eugene Valencia, leading his Flying Circus division of Hellcats, personally downed 23 Japanese aircraft during the campaign. His innovative tactical approaches, utilizing divisions of 4 aircraft in coordinated assaults, rendered traditional Japanese tactics suicidal. "We developed what we termed the mowing machine," Valencia explained. 4 Hellcats flying in line abreast, separated by 100 yards, would sweep through Japanese formations at high speed. Each pilot was responsible for covering their designated sector. We would execute a single pass, ascend back to altitude, and then repeat the maneuver. The mathematics of the Okinawa campaign were stark and irrefutable. Hellcats flew 38,038 combat sorties, claiming 2,351 aerial victories against a mere 149 losses, yielding an impressive 9.5 to 1 kill ratio. More significantly, they successfully prevented approximately 80% of incoming kamikaze aircraft from reaching their intended targets. The technology chasm. By 1945, the technological gap had widened to an unbridgeable gulf. The F6F. Hellcat incorporated further advancements that rendered it even more lethal. Water injection boosted engine power to 2,200 horsepower. Zero-length rocket launchers were introduced. Armor protection was enhanced, and the K-14 computing gun sight automatically calculated deflection. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, Japan's legendary ace with 28 official victories, though modern historians estimate closer to 15, encountered Hellcats for the first time in June 1944. Despite his considerable skill and extensive experience, he narrowly escaped death in his inaugural engagement. "I performed my most exceptional aerobatics," he wrote in his autobiography. "Loops, rolls, split S maneuvers, every tactic I had meticulously perfected over 200 combat missions. The Hellcat followed with effortless ease, almost with casual indifference. I survived solely because the American pilot committed an error. He neglected to release his drop tank prior to engaging in combat. The human cost accounting." By the war's conclusion, the F6F Hellcat had destroyed 5,223 enemy aircraft in aerial combat, sustaining losses of 270 aircraft to enemy fighters, thereby achieving an extraordinary 19.3 to 1 kill ratio. It produced 305 U.S. Navy aces and accounted for 75% of all Navy air-to-air victories. The human cost for Japan was devastating. Of the 18,000 naval aviators who had commenced the war, fewer than 100 combat-experienced pilots remained by August 1945. the kamikaze equation. The transformation of Japanese naval aviation from an elite fighting force to a repository for kamikaze operations represented the ultimate acknowledgement of Hellcat's superiority. Unable to compete conventionally, Japan resorted to employing its pilots as guided missiles. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, the architect of the kamikaze program, justified this drastic measure with stark mathematics. If a Zero attacks a carrier conventionally, the probability of success is near zero, he argued. The Hellcats will invariably destroy it. However, if the Zero is repurposed as a bomb, the probability of impact increases to 30%. The pilot faces death regardless. At least as a kamikaze, his sacrifice holds meaning. On October 25, 1944, Hiroyoshi Nishizawa escorted the inaugural official kamikaze mission led by Lieutenant Yukio Seki, claiming his 86th and 87th victories, 2 F6F Hellcats in the process. The following day, October 26, 1944, Nishizawa met his end as a passenger aboard a transport aircraft shot down by Hellcats from VF-14. Japan's most celebrated ace, rendered helpless without a fighter, succumbed to the very aircraft he had briefly managed to outmatch. The final testimony. August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito's surrender broadcast. At Atsugi Airfield, Captain Minoru Genda, who had initially dismissed the Hellcat as a brute force contraption, prioritizing weight over finesse, listened to the Emperor's pronouncements. Surrounding him were the scattered remnants of Japanese naval aviation, teenage pilots with merely 40 hours of flight instruction, aircraft pieced together from salvaged components, empty fuel tanks. On that very same day, Ensign Clarence Moore of VF-31, flying from the USS Belleau Wood, shot down a Yokosuka D-4Y Judy dive bomber shortly after 2 p.m., marking the final aerial victory of World War II. The Japanese pilot, seemingly unaware of the surrender announcement, was approaching the American fleet when Moore intercepted him. 2 brief bursts from the Hellcat's 6 guns brought an end to the Pacific Air War. The occupation's unveiling, September 1945, at Atsugi Airfield. The inaugural American aerial machines to touch down post-surrender comprised 12 F6F Hellcats originating from the U.S. Yorktown. Japanese aviators, mechanics, and ground personnel stood in formation along the landing strip, eager to observe their adversary up close. American pilot Lieutenant Robert Vasu, an accomplished ace credited with 19 aerial triumphs, proceeded to showcase the Hellcat's formidable capabilities to his Japanese counterparts. His effortless aerial maneuvers, including loops, rolls, and steep ascents, which would have easily overwhelmed a Zero fighter, left them utterly speechless. "You must grasp this," Vasu conveyed to them through an interpreter. "This is not even straining the aircraft's limits. In actual combat, with water injection engaged, its power increases by 20%. The airframe is engineered to withstand 13 G-forces. I have never, in my experience, managed to break one." The engineering post-mortem. Following the war, Japanese engineers meticulously studied captured Hellcats, discovering the full extent of American industrial might. The Pratt & Whitney R-2800 engine alone was composed of 2,840 precision-engineered components, each designed for absolute interchangeability with any other R-2800 engine. Conversely, the Nakajima Sakai demanded meticulous hand-fitting of its parts. No 2 engines were ever precisely identical. Professor Jiro Horikoshi, the celebrated designer of the Zero, undertook an exhaustive post-war examination of the Hellcat. His assessment was starkly damning. "We designed an aircraft for 1941. They designed an aircraft system for 1945. While we were perfecting the sword, they were forging the industrial age." The production miracle. Grumman's manufacturing process for the Hellcat itself became a decisive weapon. The Bethpage, New York facility operated continuously, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. At its zenith of production, a new Hellcat emerged from the assembly line every 60 minutes. The company successfully manufactured 12,275 Hellcats in a mere 30 months, an achievement the Japanese found incomprehensible. In 1944 alone, Japan produced 5,100 fighters across all models, America, in stark contrast, produced 35,000 fighters that year. The American production system incorporated innovations that appeared utterly fantastical to Japanese observers. Workers utilized color-coded instructions for assembling intricate components. Production shifts ran around the clock. Quality control remained exceptionally high, despite the accelerated pace. The strategic revolution. The Hellcat did more than just secure victories. It fundamentally redefined naval aerial warfare. Pre-war strategic doctrine presumed aircraft carriers to be vulnerable platforms, necessitating a preemptive strike for survival. The advent of the Hellcat reversed this paradigm. Carriers transformed into formidable fortresses capable of absorbing and repelling any aerial assault. Admiral Mark Mitcher, commander of Task Force 58, keenly understood this profound transformation. With the Hellcat, he declared, we no longer need to seek them out first. Let them come to us. The F6F will annihilate them at our choosing. This newfound confidence unleashed unprecedented offensive operations. American carrier groups could linger off enemy coastlines for weeks on end, their Hellcat escort screens rendering them virtually impervious to aerial attack. The cultural collision. Beyond its technological superiority, the Hellcat embodied a cultural philosophy that directly challenged and invalidated Japanese military doctrine. The samurai tradition venerated individual prowess, spiritual fortitude, and the acceptance of death. The Hellcat, conversely, symbolized systematic efficiency, overwhelming material superiority, and the preservation of life. This fundamental philosophical divergence meant that Japanese pilots struggled to adapt to Hellcat tactics, even when they understood them. The concept of disengaging from combat when at a disadvantage, a cornerstone of Hellcat operational doctrine, was an almost unthinkable notion for Japanese pilots indoctrinated in Bushido. The judgment of history. In 1962, the United States Navy convened a symposium focused on Pacific War aviation. American and Japanese veterans convened to reflect upon the conflict with the benefit of historical perspective. Captain David McCampbell, the Navy's most decorated ace with 34 aerial victories, stated unequivocally, "The Hellcat decisively won the Pacific Air War, period. It eradicated Japanese aviation and rendered our eventual triumph inevitable." Commander Saburo Sakai offered his own poignant assessment. The Zero was a superior fighter. The Hellcat was a superior weapons system. We failed to comprehend the distinction until it was far too late. We arrived with swords to a gunfight and were perplexed by our defeat. The ultimate reckoning. The Hellcat's absolute dominance can be distilled into simple statistics that reveal a profound narrative. Its overall kill ratio stood at 19-1, and specifically against Zero fighters, it was 13-1. 12,275 Hellcats were produced in 30 months. Approximately 6,000 Zero fighters were produced between 1943 and 1945. Over 5,000 American pilots received training on the Hellcat. By August 1945, fewer than 100 combat-ready Japanese pilots remained. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, who had commanded the Japanese fleet at the Battle of the Philippine Sea, provided perhaps the most candid evaluation. "We mocked the Hellcat because we failed to recognize that it represented not merely an aircraft, but an entire civilization's approach to warfare. By the time we ceased our laughter, our air forces had effectively ceased to exist." The final word. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai lived until the year 2000. In his final recorded interview, he was asked about the Hellcat. His response encapsulated the totality of its overwhelming superiority. The Zero established Japan as a significant naval power. The Hellcat forced Japan to confront the reality that it was never as great as it had perceived itself to be. We believed ourselves to be samurai. The Hellcat demonstrated that we were merely men wielding obsolete weaponry in the face of the future. Every Japanese pilot who survived the war did so because a Hellcat pilot made the choice to spare their life. That is the ultimate defeat, to exist at your adversary's discretion. The F6F, Hellcat, entered service with a weight twice that of the Zero. It carried armor that the Zero lacked. It was powered by an engine that the Japanese could not replicate. It was armed with weaponry they could not match, guided by radars they could not detect, flown by pilots they could not equal in training, and produced in numbers they could not fathom. Japanese pilots had initially scoffed at it, failing to comprehend that every additional pound of weight represented not a deficiency, but the robust strength of an industrial democracy capable of affording the protection of its warriors. By the time they grasped this truth, their initial laughter had devolved into the writing of final letters home, their mockery transformed into desperate kamikaze missions, and their confidence shattered into complete capitulation. The Hellcat had not merely defeated the Zeros, it had annihilated an entire philosophy of warfare, definitively proving that in the arena of modern combat, the nation possessing the capacity to construct the superior system would inevitably vanquish the nation, limited to forging merely superior warriors. The Japanese pilots had initially laughed at the F6F Hellcat. Ultimately, the Hellcat had the last laugh. It always did,